Marcus Chen stood outside the principal's office, his fingers unconsciously tapping against his thigh in a rhythm only he could hear. The worn linoleum floor beneath his feet had seen better days, much like everything else at Lincoln High School. Through the frosted glass door, he could see the blurred silhouette of Principal Davidson behind his massive oak desk. The only piece of furniture in the entire building that didn't look like it belonged in a salvage yard. The secretary, Mrs. Palmer, glanced up from her computer screen and offered Marcus a sympathetic smile. She'd always been kind to him, even when other staff members looked at him with barely concealed pity. Marcus was used to those looks. Being the scholarship kid at a school where most students arrived in cars that cost more than his mother's annual salary meant, he had grown thick skin over the past 3 years. "You can go in now, dear," Mrs. Palmer said softly, gesturing toward the door. Marcus took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Principal Davidson sat behind his desk. His expensive suit jacket hung carefully on a mahogany coat stand in the corner. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he reviewed some papers. He didn't look up immediately, a power move Marcus had witnessed many times before. "Sit down." "Mr. Chen," Davidson finally said, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority mixed with condescension that he seemed to reserve for students like. Marcus sat in the hard plastic chair across from the desk, his backpack settling at his feet with a soft thud. He knew why he was here. The school's annual talent showcase was in 3 weeks, and he had submitted an application to perform. It was a bold move, perhaps even foolish, but music was the one thing in Marcus's life that made sense. The one place where his poverty didn't matter, where the shabby apartment he shared with his mother and 2 younger siblings faded away. Davidson finally looked up, removing his glasses and setting them down with deliberate care. "I've reviewed your application for the talent showcase," he began, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You want to play the piano?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. The principal leaned back in his leather chair, which creaked softly under his weight. He steepled his fingers together, regarding Marcus with an expression that made the teenager's stomach tighten. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to be frank with you because I believe in being honest with my students, even when the truth is uncomfortable." Marcus remained silent, waiting for what he knew was coming. "This guy playing the piano? Don't make me laugh." Davidson's voice dripped with mockery as he gestured dismissively toward Marcus. "Do you have any idea what the talent showcase represents? This is an event attended by board members, donors, and parents who contribute significantly to the school. The performers are traditionally students who have trained extensively, who come from families that have invested thousands of dollars in private lessons, who own their own instruments." Each word felt like a small cut, but Marcus kept his face neutral. He had learned long ago not to show when something hurt. Davidson continued, warming to his subject. "I've looked into your background, Mr. Chen. You don't own a piano. You don't take lessons. Your music teacher mentioned you sometimes stay after class to practice on the school's piano, but that hardly constitutes serious training." He leaned forward, his expression almost pitying now. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's be realistic. You would be setting yourself up for embarrassment, and frankly, it would reflect poorly on the school." Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "With respect, sir, the application didn't mention any requirements about private lessons or owning an instrument. It just said students could showcase their talents." The principal's expression hardened. "Don't be obtuse, Mr. Chen. There are standards to maintain. This isn't some community center open mic night. This is Lincoln High School's premier annual event." He picked up Marcus's application and held it between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "I'm denying your application." "I'm doing you a favor, really. Better to face disappointment now than humiliation later." Marcus stood up slowly, his jaw clenched. "Is that all, sir?" "That's all. You may go." Davidson had already turned his attention back to his papers, dismissing Marcus as if he were of no consequence. Walking out of that office, Marcus felt a familiar burning sensation behind his eyes, but he refused to let any tears fall. Mrs. Palmer looked at him with concern as he passed her desk, but he couldn't meet her eyes. He just needed to get out, to find somewhere private where he could breathe. He made his way through the hallways, which were mostly empty during the lunch period. His footsteps echoed off the lockers as he walked, not really paying attention to where he was going until he found himself standing outside the music room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see the old upright piano sitting in the corner, its black finish scratched and dull. Marcus glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped inside. The room smelled of old sheet music and wood polish. He approached the piano like it was an old friend, running his fingers along the keys without pressing down. This instrument had been his refuge for the past year, ever since his music teacher, Mr. Rivera, had noticed him lingering after class and offered him a key so he could practice whenever the room was empty. Sitting down on the worn bench, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of the principal's words. The rejection hurt, but what hurt more was the assumption that he wasn't good enough, that his circumstances defined his capabilities. Davidson had looked at him and seen only a poor kid with impossible dreams. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play, letting the music flow through him. It was a piece he had been working on for months, teaching himself through online videos and sheer determination. The notes filled the empty room, transforming his pain and anger into something beautiful. Something that transcended the walls of this building and the narrow minds of people like Davidson. He didn't know how long he played, losing himself in the melody. But when he finally stopped, he made a decision. He wasn't going to let Principal Davidson's words define him. Somehow, he would find a way to prove that talent had nothing to do with money or privilege. He would show everyone that music belonged to anyone willing to work for it. To anyone who felt it in their soul, Marcus left the music room that day with renewed determination, unaware that his encounter with the principal was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Chun family's small apartment as Marcus pushed open the door. The familiar sounds of home greeted him, his 8-year-old sister, Maya, practicing her spelling words at the kitchen table, and his 10-year-old brother, David, watching educational videos on their mother's old laptop. The apartment was cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a bathroom door that never quite closed properly. But it was clean and filled with the smell of his mother's cooking. "Marcus is home," Maya announced, looking up from her workbook with a gap-toothed smile. Their mother, Susan Chen, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was a small woman who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, working double shifts as a nurse's aide to keep food on the table and clothes on her children's backs. Despite her exhaustion, her face lit up when she saw her oldest son. "How was school?" she asked in Mandarin, her preferred language at home. Marcus forced a smile and responded in English as he always did. "It was fine, Mom." But Susan Chen knew her son too well. She studied his face for a moment, then gestured toward the kitchen. "Come, eat something first, then we talk." Marcus sat at the small kitchen table while his mother placed a bowl of rice and vegetables in front of him. She sat across from him, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. Finally, Marcus told her about the meeting with Principal Davidson, about the application denial, about the humiliating words that still echoed in his mind. His mother listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each sentence. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This principal," she finally said, "he thinks money makes music?" "He is fool." Despite everything, Marcus smiled at his mother's blunt assessment. "Your grandfather," she continued, her voice softening, "he played erhu in Shanghai. Beautiful music made people cry. We had nothing. During hard times, we had less than nothing. But when he played, we were rich." She reached across the table and gripped Marcus's hand. "Music is not for rich people. Music is for people who feel it here." She placed her other hand over her heart. "I know, Mom, but what can I do? He rejected my application." Susan Chen's expression became thoughtful. "You remember Mrs. Rodriguez? From church?" Marcus nodded. Mrs. Rodriguez was a kind older woman who had immigrated from Cuba decades ago and often brought homemade pastries to the community center, where his mother volunteered on weekends. Her daughter, Elena, she teaches music at community college. I hear her talk about struggling students who need to practice. Maybe she help you." Susan pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts with determined efficiency. 2 days later, Marcus found himself standing outside a modest house in a working-class neighborhood across town. The address his mother had given him led to a small bungalow with a garden full of wildflowers and a weathered welcome mat. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun. "You must be Marcus," Elena Rodriguez said with a welcoming smile. "My mother told me to expect you." "Come in, come in." The house was filled with music. Not just the sound of it, but the presence of it everywhere. Sheet music stacked on every surface. Framed concert posters on the walls and in the living room. A beautiful grand piano that gleamed in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Elena noticed Marcus staring at the instrument. "It was my grandmother's," she explained. "Brought from Cuba piece by piece over several years. It has survived revolutions, hurricanes, and 3 generations of Rodriguez musicians." She gestured for him to sit on the bench. "My mother says you have been rejected from your school's talent show. She also says you teach yourself to play." "Show me." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he positioned them over the keys. This piano was nothing like the beaten-up school instrument he was used to. The keys felt smooth and responsive beneath his fingers. He began to play the piece he had been working on, losing himself in the music as he always did. When he finished, he looked up to find Elena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The silence stretched for several long seconds. "Who taught you to play like this?" she asked finally. "No one. I watch videos online, practice when I can at school. My music teacher lets me use the piano after class sometimes." Elena sat down in a nearby chair, shaking her head slowly. "You have raw talent, Marcus. Real talent. But you also have bad habits, gaps in technique. And you're playing that piece at least 15% too fast. Probably because you learned it from a recording meant for experienced players." She leaned forward. "My mother tells me you cannot afford lessons." Marcus felt heat rise to his face. "I'm sorry for wasting your time, Mrs. Rodriguez. I should go." "Sit down," Elena said firmly. "I didn't say I wouldn't teach you. I said you cannot afford lessons. These are different things." She stood and walked to the piano, opening a folder of sheet music. "I teach at the community college during the week, but I have time on Saturday mornings. 3 hours every Saturday. I will teach you properly, the way my grandmother taught me, the way her teachers taught her in Havana." Marcus stared at her, hardly believing what he was hearing. "But I can't pay you. Did I ask for payment?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Music is not about money, Marcus. Music is about passion, dedication, and the willingness to work harder than you have ever worked before. My grandmother used to say that God gives us talents not for ourselves, but to share with the world. You have been given a gift. It would be a sin to waste it." She extended her hand. "So do we have an agreement?" Marcus shook her hand, fighting back tears. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Elena warned with a slight smile. "I am a difficult teacher. My students either love me or hate me, and sometimes both in the same day. We start this Saturday at 8 in the morning. Bring a notebook, a recording device if you have one, and prepare to have everything you think you know about piano challenged." As Marcus walked home that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Principal Davidson had tried to crush his dreams, but instead, he had inadvertently set Marcus on a path that would change everything. That night, Marcus lay in the bed he shared with his brother David, staring at the ceiling where a water stain had formed a shape that looked vaguely like a bird in flight. He thought about the grand piano in Elena's living room, about her grandmother carrying it piece by piece from Cuba, about music surviving revolutions and hurricanes. If music could survive all that, Marcus thought, then surely it could survive Principal Davidson's ridicule. And maybe, just maybe, he could prove that talent had nothing to do with wealth or privilege, and everything to do with heart. He fell asleep that night with melodies running through his mind, unaware that his first Saturday lesson with Elena would mark the beginning of a transformation that would eventually force even Principal Davidson to reconsider everything he thought he knew about music and the students who created it. Saturday morning arrived with Marcus waking before his alarm. his stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He carefully extricated himself from the bed without waking David, grabbed the notebook and pen he had prepared the night before, and quietly made his way to the kitchen. His mother was already awake, dressed in her scrubs for the morning shift at the nursing home. "Big day," she said simply, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs toward him. "Eat, you need energy." Marcus ate quickly, checking the time every few minutes. His mother watched him with an amused expression. "Marcus, you have 1 hour. The bus ride is 25 minutes. Relax." But relaxing was impossible. By the time Marcus arrived at Elena's house, his palms were sweating despite the cool morning air. Elena answered the door in a flowing cardigan, her hair in the same loose bun, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Punctual," she observed approvingly. "That's good. Punctuality shows respect for your teacher's time and your own commitment." She led him to the living room where the grand piano waited like a sleeping giant. "Before we begin playing, we talk. Sit." Marcus sat on the piano bench while Elena settled into her chair. "Tell me why you play piano," she said. The question caught Marcus off guard. I like music." "Wrong answer." Elena's expression was stern but not unkind. "Liking something is not enough to sustain you through the difficult work ahead. Try again." "Why do you play?" Marcus thought carefully this time, reaching for the truth he had never articulated out loud. "When I play, nothing else matters. Not our apartment, not being the poor kid at school, not people looking at me like I don't belong. When I'm at the piano, I'm just ... me. And that's enough." Elena nodded slowly. "Better. Much better. Remember that feeling, Marcus, because there will be days when your fingers hurt, when a piece seems impossible, when you want to give up. That feeling is your anchor." She stood and moved to the piano. "Now let me hear you play scales. Start with C major." What followed were the most intense 3 hours of Marcus's life. Elena was patient but demanding, correcting his hand position, his posture, his breathing. She made him play the same scale 20 times until his fingers found the muscle memory she demanded. When he thought he had it perfect, she would shake her head and make him start again. "You're tensing your shoulders," she would say. Or, "Your wrist is too high." Or, "Listen to the quality of each note. They should be pearls on a string, each one beautiful and even." By the time she allowed him to attempt an actual piece, Marcus's fingers ached and his back was sore from maintaining proper posture. But something remarkable had happened. When he played, the notes came out clearer, more controlled, more intentional than ever before. Elena listened to him play a simple Bach prelude, her face impassive. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You have a good ear," she finally said. "And you learn quickly. But you also have years of bad habits to unlearn. This will not be easy." "I'm ready to work," Marcus said firmly. "We'll see." Elena handed him a folder of sheet music. "Practice these every day. 1 hour minimum. I want to see progress next Saturday, real progress." "Do you have access to a piano during the week?" Marcus explained about the school piano and Mr. Rivera's kindness in allowing him access to the music room. "Good. Then you have no excuses." Elena walked him to the door. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something my grandmother told me when I was your age and full of dreams. Talent is common. Dedication is rare. What separates good musicians from great ones is not how gifted they are, but how willing they are to work when no one is watching, to practice when they're tired, to push through when every instinct says to quit." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I see something in you. Don't waste it." Marcus left Elena's house that morning feeling both exhausted and energized. The bus ride home gave him time to reflect on everything he had learned. His fingers automatically practiced the scales on his thigh, earning a curious look from the elderly woman sitting across from him. The following week established a pattern that would define Marcus's life for the next several months. He would arrive at school early, before classes started, and practice in the music room. Mr. Rivera, his music teacher, had noticed the change in his playing immediately. "Someone's been giving you lessons," Mr. Rivera observed one morning. Leaning against the doorframe as Marcus worked through his exercises, Marcus nodded. Explaining about Elena. Mr. Rivera smiled. "Elena Rodriguez? I know her reputation. You're lucky. She doesn't take on just anyone." He paused. The talent showcase rejection. That was wrong. Davidson was wrong. The words meant more to Marcus than Mr. Rivera probably knew. Thank you, sir. Keep working, Mr. Rivera said. Real talent always finds a way to shine through, regardless of what narrow-minded people think. During lunch periods, while other students socialized or played sports, Marcus would slip into the music room and practice. After school, he would stay as late as the building remained open, his fingers dancing across the keys until the janitor gently reminded him it was time to lock up Dot at home. He would listen to recordings on his mother's old laptop, studying the nuances of professional performances, trying to understand not just what they played but how and why. His siblings learned to do their homework to the sound of piano music drifting through the thin walls. Marcus is always working, David complained one evening. Can't we watch something fun? Their mother shushed him. Your brother has a dream. We support him. Maya, however, seemed fascinated by Marcus's dedication. She would sometimes sit outside his door, listening as he practiced the same passage over and over. Doesn't it get boring? She asked him one night. Playing the same thing so many times? Marcus thought about how to explain it. Each time I play it, I understand it a little better. It's like reading the same story over and over, but each time you notice something new, something you missed before. The Saturdays with Elena became the highlight of Marcus's week. Each lesson built upon the previous one, expanding his repertoire and deepening his understanding. Elena was demanding but never cruel, pushing him to his limits while knowing exactly when to pull back. You're improving, she told him after his fourth lesson. But improvement is not enough. I want excellence. How will I know when I've reached it? Marcus asked. Elena laughed, a warm, rich sound. You'll never reach it. Excellence is not a destination, Marcus. It's a direction. You keep moving toward it, always growing, always learning, always striving to be better than you were yesterday. 3 weeks after his first lesson with Elena, Marcus was practicing at school when he heard voices in the hallway. He recognized Principal Davidson's booming tone and paused, his hands hovering over the keys. The showcase is coming together nicely, Davidson was saying to someone. We have the Brighton twins performing a violin duet, young Jennifer Walsh with her award-winning vocal performance, and the Johnson boy is doing a classical guitar piece. All top-tier talent from excellent families. The words stung, but Marcus refused to let them derail him. He turned back to the piano and began playing a complex Chopin nocturne that Elena had recently introduced him to. The piece was difficult, requiring a level of technical skill and emotional depth that challenged everything he had learned. He didn't hear the voices stop in the hallway. He didn't notice Mr. Rivera standing in the doorway with Principal Davidson. He was lost in the music, his fingers finding their way through the intricate passages, his whole being focused on bringing the composition to life. When the final notes faded, there was silence. Then, Mr. Rivera's voice. That was beautiful, Marcus. Marcus looked up, startled to see both teachers watching him. Principal Davidson's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been surprise. Davidson cleared his throat. Well, that's quite improved from before. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Marcus and Mr. Rivera alone. He's wrong about you, Mr. Rivera said quietly. And I think, deep down, he's starting to realize it. The talent showcase was now just 1 week away, and Lincoln High School buzzed with excitement. Posters decorated the hallways announcing the event scheduled for Friday evening at 7. The performers' names were listed in elegant script, each one representing hours of professional training and family investment. Marcus saw the posters every day, each glance a small reminder of Principal Davidson's rejection. But something had shifted inside him. The anger and hurt had transformed into something more powerful: determination. He wasn't practicing to prove Principal Davidson wrong anymore. He was practicing because the music had become part of him, as essential as breathing. Saturday morning arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. Marcus made his way to Elena's house, his backpack heavy with sheet music and his notebook filled with questions from the week's practice. When Elena opened the door, her expression was more serious than usual. "Come in quickly," she said. "We have much to discuss today." Once inside, Elena led him not to the piano but to her kitchen table. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her mug. Marcus, I've been thinking about your situation at school. This principal who rejected you, who mocked your dreams. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I'm over it, Mrs. Rodriguez, really. I don't think you are, and that's good. You shouldn't be over it. Elena's eyes held a fierce light. But I think it's time we channel that feeling into something productive. Tell me about this talent showcase. Marcus explained everything. The Friday night performance, the guest list of donors and board members, the carefully selected students who would be performing. As he spoke, Elena's expression grew thoughtful. And there's no way for you to participate officially? She asked. Not unless Principal Davidson changes his mind. And that's not going to happen. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on the table in a rhythm that Marcus recognized as a Beethoven sonata. Then we don't wait for permission, she said finally. We create opportunity. She explained her idea. The showcase took place in the school auditorium, but the reception afterward was held in the main hall, where the old piano sat unused in the corner. It was the same piano where Marcus practiced during lunch, a forgotten relic that most people walked past without noticing. During the reception, Elena said, while everyone is congratulating the performers and the principal is busy networking with his precious donors, you sit down at that piano and you play, not for permission, not for approval. You play because you can, because you have earned the right through your work and dedication. Marcus's heart raced. But that would be crashing the event. I could get in trouble. Life is not lived by those who wait for permission to use their gifts, Elena said firmly. My grandmother used to perform in the streets of Havana when the government said she couldn't play in concert halls. She didn't ask permission. She just played and people stopped to listen because real music cannot be silenced by bureaucracy. The idea both terrified and thrilled Marcus. What if nobody listens? What if they just throw me out? Then you will have tried. But I don't think that will happen. Elena stood and moved to the piano. We have 1 week. This week, we don't just practice. We perfect. I'm going to teach you a piece that will make everyone in that room stop and listen. Are you ready? Marcus joined her at the piano, his hands trembling slightly as he placed them on the keys. I'm ready. What followed was the most intensive week of musical training Marcus had ever experienced. Elena had him come every day after school, sacrificing her own time to drill the piece into his fingers and soul. It was Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a composition of devastating beauty and technical complexity. This piece tells a story, Elena explained as they worked through the opening chords. It speaks of struggle, of darkness, but also of triumph. It is perfect for you, for this moment. The music was unlike anything Marcus had played before. The crashing chords demanded power and precision, while the delicate middle section required a gentleness that seemed impossible to achieve. His hands ached from the stretches required, and more than once, he wanted to give up. I can't do this, he said on Wednesday evening. After his 20th attempt at a particularly difficult passage ended in a muddy mess of wrong notes, Elena stopped him with a firm hand on his shoulder. Can't? Or won't work hard enough to can? There's a difference, Marcus. He looked at her, frustrated tears threatening to spill. What if I'm not good enough? You are good enough, but you must believe it yourself. She gestured to the piano. This instrument doesn't care about your bank account, your scholarship status, or what some principal thinks of you. It only responds to your skill and your heart. Now play it again. By Friday afternoon, Marcus could play the piece from memory, every note precisely placed, every dynamic shift carefully controlled. Elena had made him perform it for her at least 50 times. Sometimes in the middle, sometimes from random starting points, until the music flowed from him as naturally as speech. Tonight, she said, as he prepared to leave for what felt like the 100th time, you will not be performing for the principal or the donors or the other students. You will be playing for yourself, for your mother and siblings, for everyone who has ever been told they're not good enough. And you will be playing for the music itself, to honor the beauty of what Rachmaninoff created. Can you do that? Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Then go. And remember, you have already won, because you have transformed yourself through dedication and work. Everything else is just noise. That evening, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his apartment, wearing the only dress shirt he owned. His mother had ironed it carefully, and Maya had helped him with his tie, even though it took 6 attempts to get it right. David gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up. You look fancy, Maya declared. Like a real piano player. I'm a real piano player, Marcus said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. His mother appeared in the doorway, her eyes suspiciously bright. Your grandfather would be proud, she said in Mandarin. Go, make beautiful music. The school auditorium was already filling up when Marcus arrived. He wasn't allowed in the main seating area, of course, but he found a spot in the back corner behind the last row where he could observe without being noticed. The stage was beautifully decorated, with professional lighting and a rented concert grand piano that gleamed under the spotlights. Principal Davidson stood near the front, greeting well-dressed parents and board members with hearty handshakes and broad smiles. He looked completely in his element, the successful administrator showcasing his school's finest talents. The performance began, and Marcus had to admit the students were talented. The Brighton twins played their violin duet with technical precision, though Marcus thought they lacked emotional depth. Jennifer Walsh's voice was indeed impressive, hitting every note with crystalline clarity. The Johnson boys' classical guitar piece was competent, if a bit safe in its interpretation. Throughout it all, Principal Davidson beamed with pride, as if he had personally trained each performer. During the intermission, Marcus slipped out and made his way to the main hall, where tables were being set up for the reception. The old piano sat in its usual corner, largely ignored by the catering staff rushing to arrange refreshments. Marcus approached it slowly, running his fingers along the scarred surface. This piano had been his refuge, his classroom, his confessional. Tonight, it would be his stage. The final performances concluded to enthusiastic applause, and soon the crowd began filing into the main hall. Marcus positioned himself near the piano, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He watched as Principal Davidson entered, surrounded by board members, accepting congratulations for the successful showcase. This was it. The moment that would either validate months of work or end in humiliation. Marcus took a deep breath, sat down at the piano bench, and placed his hands on the keys. For just a moment, he closed his eyes and remembered everything that had brought him to this point. His mother's faith, Elena's teaching, Mr. Rivera's kindness, and his own countless hours of practice. Then he began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor crashed through the reception hall like thunder. The sound was so unexpected, so commanding, that conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the corner where the forgotten piano sat. Where Marcus Chen, the scholarship student, the boy who had been rejected and ridiculed, played as though his very soul depended on it. The music filled every corner of the space, the powerful bass notes resonating through the floor while the melodies soared above. Marcus's fingers moved with absolute certainty across the keys, executing the complex passages that had taken him countless hours to master. His eyes were closed, his body swaying slightly with the music, completely lost in the performance. In the crowd, Principal Davidson froze with a glass of punch halfway to his lips. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that might have been shock. The board members around him had stopped their conversations, drawn inexorably toward the music that seemed to make the very air vibrate with emotion. Mrs. Palmer, the secretary, stood near the refreshment table with tears streaming down her face. Mr. Rivera had positioned himself near the entrance, his arms crossed and a knowing smile playing at his lips. He had anticipated something like this, had even encouraged it in his own subtle way. The piece moved into its haunting middle section, where the crashing chords gave way to a delicate, almost fragile melody. Marcus played these measures with a tenderness that seemed impossible from the same hands that had just commanded such power. It was here that the true artistry showed, in the way he could shift from strength to vulnerability in a single breath. A woman in an elegant evening gown moved closer to the piano, her expensive jewelry glinting in the light. She was Dr. Patricia Hoang, a member of the school board and the dean of the music conservatory at the State University. She watched Marcus's hands with the trained eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating musical talent. The piece built again toward its dramatic climax, the melody returning with even greater intensity. Marcus's whole body was engaged now, his arms lifting for the big chords, his face a mask of concentration and emotion. This wasn't just playing. This was channeling something larger than himself. Giving voice to every frustration, every dream, every moment of doubt and triumph. As the final chords rang out, powerful and definitive, the silence that followed was absolute. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then, someone began to clap. It was Dr. Huang, her applause slow and deliberate. Mrs. Palmer joined in, then Mr. Rivera, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause that seemed to shake the walls. Marcus opened his eyes, blinking as though waking from a dream. The reality of what he had just done crashed over him. He had performed without permission, had essentially crashed the reception, had put himself directly in opposition to Principal Davidson's authority. His hands began to tremble as the adrenaline faded and fear took its place. He looked up to find Principal Davidson staring at him, the man's face an unreadable mask. The applause was still thunderous, but Marcus could only focus on the principal, waiting for the anger. The consequences that surely must come. But before Davidson could move or speak, Dr. Huang was already making her way through the crowd toward the piano. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, and the crowd parted for her automatically. "Young man," she said, her voice cutting through the dying applause. "That was extraordinary. Who is your teacher?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Elena Rodriguez, ma'am." Dr. Huang's eyebrows rose. "Elena? I should have known. She was one of our finest graduates." She turned to address the crowd, her voice projecting effortlessly. "For those who don't know, you've just witnessed a performance of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, one of the most technically and emotionally demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. This young man has just performed it at a level I would expect from a conservatory student, not a high school teenager." The crowd murmured with appreciation, and Marcus felt his face growing hot. Dr. Huang turned back to him. "What's your name, and why haven't you been performing at events like tonight's showcase?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus glanced at Principal Davidson, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "My name is Marcus Chun, and I applied to perform in the showcase, but my application was denied." "Denied?" Dr. Huang's tone was sharp. She looked directly at Principal Davidson. "Frank, surely there's been some mistake?" Principal Davidson cleared his throat, his carefully cultivated composure cracking. "Well, there were concerns about preparedness, about ... Dr. Huang, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "I don't think so." Dr. Huang's voice could have cut glass. "This young man just demonstrated more musicality and technical skill than most of the performers we saw tonight on that rented concert grand. So I'll ask again, why was he denied the opportunity to perform?" The crowd had gone silent again, but now the silence was uncomfortable, expectant. Principal Davidson's face had turned an unhealthy shade of red. "The showcase has certain standards," he began weakly. "We typically feature students who have had extensive training, who come from established musical backgrounds." "You mean students whose parents can afford expensive lessons," Dr. Huang interrupted flatly. "Students from wealthy families who donate to the school." She looked around the room, her gaze challenging anyone to contradict her. "I've been on this board for 12 years, and I've watched this showcase become less about talent and more about politics. Tonight, this young man has reminded us what music is actually about." Mr. Rivera stepped forward from where he had been watching near the wall. "If I may, Dr. Huang, Marcus has been teaching himself primarily through online resources and sheer determination. He practices on that old piano during his lunch periods and after school. I've been fortunate to provide him with access to the music room, but his progress is entirely due to his own dedication. And now Elena Rodriguez is teaching him," Dr. Huang mused. "Frank, do you understand what that means? Elena doesn't take students lightly. If she's working with this young man, it's because she sees genuine talent worth nurturing." Marcus wanted to disappear. This confrontation was gratifying in some ways, but it was also excruciating. He had wanted to prove himself through music, not through causing a scene that embarrassed the principal in front of the board and donors. I apologize, Marcus said quietly, standing up from the piano bench. I shouldn't have crashed the reception. I just wanted to play to show that I could. I'll go now. Sit down, Marcus. Dr. Huang's command was gentle but firm. You have nothing to apologize for. Music played at this level should never be apologized for. She turned back to Davidson. However, I think Principal Davidson has some things he needs to say. Davidson looked like a man being led to his own execution. The arrogance and condescension that had characterized his rejection of Marcus's application were gone, replaced by clear discomfort under Dr. Huang's withering gaze and the expectant stares of the crowd. I may have been hasty, Davidson began, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. In my evaluation of Mr. Chen's application, hasty? Dr. Huang's tone suggested this wasn't nearly enough. Davidson's jaw clenched. I made assumptions based on circumstances rather than ability. That was wrong. He looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the performance ended. Mr. Chen, you have demonstrated exceptional talent. I apologize for dismissing your application without giving you a fair chance to prove yourself. The apology sounded sincere, though it was clearly costing Davidson considerable pride to deliver it. Marcus nodded slowly, not quite sure how to respond. However, Dr. Wang continued, addressing the full crowd now, I think we need to examine how we select performers for events like these. If we're turning away students like Marcus while accepting applications based primarily on who their parents are and how much money they've invested in lessons, then we're failing in our mission as educators. One of the board members, an older gentleman in an expensive suit, stepped forward. Dr. Huang makes an excellent point. Perhaps it's time we restructured the selection process for the showcase to focus on blind auditions, where talent is the only criterion. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Principal Davidson looked like he wanted to argue but recognized the futility of doing so with the board members watching. Dr. Huang pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Marcus. I want you to come see me at the conservatory next week. We have scholarship programs for talented students, and I think you would be an excellent candidate. Elena's recommendation will carry significant weight, and after tonight's performance, I have no doubts about your potential. Marcus took the card with shaking hands, barely able to process what was happening. A scholarship to the music conservatory? The idea seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Thank you, he managed to whisper. Thank you so much. As the reception resumed and conversation started up again, Marcus found himself surrounded by people wanting to congratulate him, to ask about his playing, to share their appreciation for the performance. The weekend following the talent showcase reception felt surreal to Marcus. He woke up Saturday morning half convinced the previous night had been a dream, but the business card from Dr. Huang sitting on his nightstand proved otherwise. The simple white card with embossed lettering seemed to glow with possibility in the early morning light. His mother had stayed up waiting for him the night before, and when he told her everything that had happened, she had cried. Real tears streaming down her face as she pulled him into a fierce embrace. Your grandfather is watching, she whispered in Mandarin. He knows. He's proud. Now, as Marcus made his way to Elena's house for his regular Saturday lesson, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. He wasn't sure what to expect from Elena, whether she would be pleased with his bold move or disappointed that he had performed without her being there to witness it. Elena opened the door before he could knock, her expression inscrutable. Come in, she said simply. Once inside, she led him to the piano but didn't sit down. Instead, she stood with her arms crossed, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus nervous. Mrs. Rodriguez, he began. She held up one hand. Before you speak, I want you to know that I received 3 phone calls last night and 2 more this morning. One was from Dr. Patricia Huang, who I trained with at the conservatory 20 years ago. One was from a parent who was at the reception and wanted to know if I was taking new students. The others were from school board members who wanted to discuss restructuring Lincoln High's music program. Marcus's eyes widened. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Trouble? Elena's stern expression finally cracked into a wide smile. Marcus, you didn't cause trouble. You caused a revolution. A small one perhaps, but a revolution nonetheless. She moved to the piano and sat down on the bench, patting the space beside her. Sit, tell me everything. Marcus recounted the entire evening, from his nervous arrival to the moment Dr. Huang handed him her card. Elena listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her eyes gleaming with something that looked like pride. You played it perfectly, she asked when he finished. Not perfectly. I rushed slightly in the third section, and one of the chords in the finale wasn't as clean as it should have been. Elena laughed, a rich, warm sound. You are becoming a true musician, Marcus. Only real musicians are their own harshest critics. She placed a hand on his shoulder. My grandmother used to say that music has power beyond notes and rhythms. It has the power to change minds, to open hearts, to tear down walls that seemed unbreakable. Last night you used that power. But Principal Davidson, he looked so humiliated. Good, Elena said firmly. Not because I take pleasure in anyone's humiliation, but because sometimes people need to be humiliated to recognize their prejudices. Your principal made assumptions about you based on your economic circumstances. He believed that excellence could only come from privilege. You proved him wrong in the most undeniable way possible. She stood and walked to her bookshelf, pulling out a worn photo album. Sitting back down beside Marcus, she opened it to a page showing a young woman in a simple dress standing beside a piano in what looked like a street market. My grandmother, Elena explained. This was taken in Havana in 1957, just before the revolution. See that piano? It was damaged in a fire, missing keys, barely functional. But she played it every day in the market square and people would stop to listen. The authorities told her to stop, said she was disrupting commerce, that her music wasn't appropriate for public spaces. Elena smiled at the memory. She played anyway. And eventually, even the authorities stopped trying to silence her, because her music was undeniable. Marcus studied the photo, seeing something of himself in that young woman's determined expression. You come from a long line of musicians who refuse to be silenced, Elena continued. Not just my family, but your own. Your mother told me about your grandfather and his erhu. We are all connected by this refusal to let circumstances define our worth or silence our voices. The lesson that followed was different from their previous sessions. Elena focused less on technique and more on interpretation, on understanding the emotional landscape of the pieces they worked on. She talked about music as a language, one that could communicate things words could never express. When you played last night, she said, you weren't just executing notes. You were telling your story. Every person in that room felt it, even if they couldn't articulate what they were feeling. That's the difference between a technician and an artist. As the lesson drew to a close, Elena handed Marcus a new piece of sheet music. It was a contemporary composition, challenging and beautiful, nothing like the classical pieces they had been working on. This is for you, she said. Composed by a student of mine who grew up in circumstances much like yours. She now teaches at Juilliard. I want you to learn this piece to make it your own. Because when you meet with Dr. Huang next week, you should show her not just classical mastery, but your ability to interpret diverse musical styles. Marcus looked at the music, his eyes widening at the complexity. 1 week? You learned Rachmaninoff in 1 week, Elena reminded him with a knowing smile. You're capable of more than you think. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Marcus spent every available moment working on the new piece, fitting practice sessions around his classes and homework. The music was unlike anything he had played before, requiring a different kind of emotional expression. A more personal interpretation. Mr. Rivera noticed the change in his playing immediately. You're coming into your own, the teacher observed one afternoon, listening as Marcus worked through a particularly challenging section. I've been teaching for 23 years, Marcus, and I can count on one hand the number of students who've shown your level of growth and dedication. Thank you, Mr. Rivera, and thank you for always believing in me, even when Principal Davidson didn't. Mr. Rivera's expression grew serious. Between you and me, what happened at that reception needed to happen. Davidson is a good administrator in many ways, but he's let his focus on fundraising and politics overshadow what schools are really supposed to be, about recognizing and nurturing talent wherever it appears. He paused. I heard the board is implementing new policies for next year's showcase. Blind auditions, merit-based selection. You started something important, Marcus. Thursday afternoon arrived, bringing with it Marcus's appointment at the conservatory. His mother had arranged to take a rare afternoon off from work to accompany him, and they rode the bus together across town to the university campus. The conservatory building was impressive, all glass and modern architecture. So different from Lincoln High's aging facilities dot inside. The walls echoed with the sound of music. A violin somewhere in the distance. A soprano practicing scales. A piano student working through a complex jazz progression. Marcus felt simultaneously at home and completely out of his depth. Dr. Huang's office was on the third floor, and her door was open when they arrived. She stood as they entered, extending her hand first to Marcus's mother, then to Marcus himself. "Mrs. Chen, Marcus, thank you for coming. Please sit." Her office was filled with photographs of performances, awards, and memorabilia from decades in music education. I'd asked Elena Rodriguez to join us. She should be here any moment. As if on cue, Elena appeared in the doorway, greeting Dr. Huang warmly before taking a seat beside Marcus. The two older women clearly had a comfortable relationship built on years of mutual respect. "Marcus," Dr. Huang began, "Elena has told me about your work together. And of course I witnessed your performance last week. I've also done some research into your background and academic record." She pulled out a folder from her desk. "What I'm about to propose is somewhat unusual, so I want you to listen carefully before responding." Marcus felt his mother's hand find his under the table, squeezing gently. "We have a pre-conservatory program here," Dr. Huang explained, "designed for exceptionally talented high school students. It's intensive, meeting 3 afternoons per week plus Saturdays, and it's quite demanding academically as well as musically. Students who complete the program successfully are essentially guaranteed admission to the conservatory for their undergraduate studies, with full scholarship consideration." Marcus's heart was racing. This sounded too good to be true. "The program typically costs $15,000 per year," Dr. Huang continued, and Marcus felt his hope deflate like a punctured balloon. There was no way his family could afford that. "However," she said, noting his expression, "we have several full scholarships available for students who demonstrate both exceptional talent and financial need. Based on everything I've seen and heard, I'd like to offer you one of these scholarships effective immediately." The room seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped his mother's hand tighter, afraid he might have misheard. This would mean leaving Lincoln High? His mother asked in her accented English. "No, not entirely," Dr. Huang clarified. Marcus would continue his regular academic classes at Lincoln but would come here for his musical training. It's challenging to balance both, but many students manage successfully. We also provide tutoring support to help students maintain their academic performance. Elena leaned forward. "Marcus, this is an extraordinary opportunity." 6 months had passed since Marcus Chen first walked through the conservatory doors as a scholarship student. The transformation in that time had been remarkable, not just in his musical abilities but in his entire presence. He moved with a confidence he had never possessed before, the kind that came from having your worth recognized and your talents nurtured by people who understood them. The pre-conservatory program had been every bit as demanding as Dr. Huang had promised. Marcus's days became a carefully orchestrated ballet of academic classes at Lincoln High, followed by intense afternoon sessions at the conservatory. Then homework and practice late into the night. His siblings learned to sleep through the sound of piano music drifting through the apartment walls. His mother often came home from her night shift to find him still awake, headphones on, studying recordings or working through particularly difficult passages. "You need sleep," she would scold gently in Mandarin, but the pride in her eyes undermined any real criticism. At Lincoln High, Marcus had become something of a minor celebrity. Students who had never spoken to him before now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers treated him with new respect. Even Principal Davidson had undergone a visible transformation in his attitude, though their interactions remained somewhat awkward, weighted by the memory of that initial rejection. The real change in Davidson had come gradually. True to Dr. Huang's words at the reception, the school board had implemented sweeping reforms to the music program. Blind auditions were now standard for all showcase events. The board had also allocated funding to refurbish the old piano in the main hall and to provide more access to musical resources for students from lower-income families. Davidson had been forced to confront the biases that had shaped his decisions, And to his credit, he seemed genuinely committed to change. He had even approached Marcus one day in the hallway, asking him to consider mentoring younger students who showed musical promise but lacked resources. "You have a unique perspective," Davidson had said, his tone entirely different from their first meeting in his office. "You understand what it's like to face barriers, and you've demonstrated how dedication can overcome them. That's valuable knowledge to share." Marcus had agreed and now spent one lunch period each week working with 3 freshman students, helping them with basic theory and technique. Watching these younger students struggle with concepts that now seemed simple to him, Marcus understood what Elena had meant about teaching being its own form of learning. At the conservatory, Marcus thrived under the instruction of multiple teachers, each bringing their own expertise and perspective. His primary instructor, Professor James Wu, was a renowned concert pianist who pushed Marcus to explore the emotional depths of every piece he played. "Technique is merely the vehicle," Professor Wu often said. "The destination is always the human heart. When you play, I should feel something, Marcus. Not just admiration for your skill, but connection to your humanity." Marcus also studied music theory with Dr. Sarah Klein, a brilliant but demanding teacher who helped him understand the architectural complexity underlying the pieces he loved. Composition classes with Professor Maria Santos opened entirely new creative possibilities, teaching him to not just interpret music but to create it. The other students in the pre-conservatory program came from diverse backgrounds. Some were like Marcus, scholarship students who had clawed their way to this opportunity through sheer determination. Others came from wealthy families with generations of musical training. What united them all was genuine passion and serious talent. Marcus formed close friendships with several students, particularly Jamie Washington, a violinist from the South Side whose grandmother had mortgaged her house to pay for his first violin, and Keiko Tanaka, a cellist whose immigrant parents worked 18-hour days at their restaurant to support her musical education. "We're the hungry ones," Jamie observed one Saturday afternoon as the 3 of them practiced in one of the conservatory's smaller studios. "We know what it costs to get here, so we're not going to waste it." Elena continued her Saturday morning lessons with Marcus, though now they functioned more as mentoring sessions than traditional instruction. She helped him process what he was learning at the conservatory, offered perspective on his various teachers' approaches, and occasionally reminded him of where he had come from. "Don't lose the fire that brought you here," she cautioned one morning. "I've seen talented students become complacent once they've achieved their initial goals. The real work begins after you arrive, not before." As spring arrived, bringing with it the promise of another talent showcase at Lincoln High, Marcus received an unexpected summons to Principal Davidson's office. The last time he had been called there had been for that initial rejection, and despite everything that had changed, Marcus still felt a flutter of anxiety as he knocked on the familiar door. "Come in, Marcus," Davidson called, his voice warm. The office looked exactly the same, but the man behind the desk seemed different. Davidson stood as Marcus entered, gesturing to the chair across from him, the same uncomfortable plastic seat where Marcus had sat during that humiliating first meeting. "I want to talk to you about this year's showcase," Davidson began, and Marcus felt his shoulders tense involuntarily. Davidson noticed and held up a hand. "Please, hear me out. I know our history makes this awkward, but I hope you'll give me a chance to make amends." "Okay," Marcus said cautiously. Davidson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "This year's showcase is going to be different, as you know. Blind auditions, merit-based selection, all the reforms the board implemented. We've received twice as many applications as usual, including several from students who never would have considered applying before." He paused. "Students like you who have talent but lack traditional training or resources." Marcus nodded, unsure where this was going. "I want you to be part of the selection committee," Davidson said. "Not just as a former applicant, but as someone who understands what we're looking for, genuine talent and dedication regardless of packaging. You have a unique perspective that would be invaluable." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The principal who had rejected and mocked him now wanted his input on selecting performers. "What about conflict of interest?" Marcus asked. "I'm a student here. You won't be voting on your own application, of course, assuming you apply. And we'll have several committee members to ensure fairness." Davidson's expression grew more serious. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the forced statement I made at the reception. What I said to you that day in this office was wrong, not just professionally, but morally. I let my own biases and assumptions cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I nearly prevented a genuinely talented student from pursuing his passion. Marcus sat back processing this. The apology felt sincere, far more so than the public one at the reception. Davidson continued, I've been an educator for 28 years, and I thought I understood what mattered in education. But you taught me something I should have learned long ago, that potential can't be measured by economic circumstances. That dedication often flourishes most strongly in those who have to fight for every opportunity. And that sometimes the most important thing a teacher can do is get out of a student's way and let them shine. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. That means a lot. So, will you do it? Serve on the selection committee? Marcus thought about the freshman students he was mentoring, about students like Jamie and Keiko at the conservatory, about everyone who had ever faced barriers to pursuing their talents. Yes, he said. I'll do it. The selection process for the showcase was revelatory. Listening to blind auditions, Marcus heard talent in unexpected places. A sophomore who had taught herself guitar using library books. A senior who played saxophone with technical precision but needed guidance on emotional expression. A junior whose voice was raw but powerful, shaped by singing in her church choir rather than formal training. The committee's discussions were passionate and democratic. Mrs. Palmer represented the administrative perspective. Mr. Rivera brought his decades of teaching experience. Dr. Huang participated via video conference from the conservatory. And two parent representatives rounded out the group. Every decision was debated, every selection justified based on merit rather than background. When the final performer list was announced, it reflected genuine diversity. Students from wealthy families and scholarship recipients. Classically trained musicians and self-taught prodigies. Traditional performances and innovative interpretations. The showcase promised to be unlike any Lincoln High had previously produced. Marcus himself had applied and had been selected through the blind audition process. He would perform a piece he had composed himself, a modern interpretation of themes from his Chinese heritage blended with Western classical structure. Professor Santos had helped him refine the composition, but the emotional core was entirely his own, a musical exploration of identity, struggle, and triumph. The night of the showcase arrived with perfect spring weather. The auditorium was packed, filled with parents, board members, students, and members of the wider community who had heard about the reformed program. Marcus's mother sat in the third row with Maya and David,